Well, today I have a really fascinating guest, someone who I've enjoyed listening to. He's got some great historical podcasts, and he recently went viral when Donald Trump and other people started talking about this Twitter thread that he did, talking about the real heart of the matter of why the boomer cons, the boomer conservative types, were so disenfranchised by what had happened in 2020 in the election. He is the host of the MartyrMade Podcast, and it's going to be a real interesting discussion. Darryl Cooper joins us. How you doing, Darryl?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great having you. And I've been wanting to do this for some time. We were talking a little bit a while back now about Rene Girard and our mutual interest in his work. Of course, you kind of go in a more broader category of looking at all kinds of different interesting stories and cultures throughout history. Is that your background formally as history, or how did you get into this subject?
No, it's an informal interest. I was an engineer. I worked on air and ballistic missile defense systems for the Department of Defense for 20 years. And I've only more recently started doing the podcasting and, content thing full time. So yeah, my background's all technical, but part of my job for all those years would be that I would, travel a lot, like 8, 9, 10, 11 months a year, sometimes overseas. And I would usually be alone. And so I would bring one suitcase full of my clothes and other things that I needed for the trip. And I'd bring another suitcase full of books. And, that's how I'd spend most of my time. So
what was the most interesting mix of book and location that you recall in your travels?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I wasn't prepared for that one. Sorry.
Well, I just say that because, you always have those weird moments where, you're maybe you're bathing in a Iceland hot spring while reading Dostoevsky or something random like that. And you have this epiphany. Oh my goodness, this is what it's all about. Or, you know what I mean? Sometimes people have those moments in their travels, where it all makes sense for a moment. They're like, wait, I'm in the middle of, the Sea of Galilee reading about, human sacrifice or something. And it clicks.
When, it was about, I read Girard's book several years ago, and then kind of, I put it into my hard drive, kind of, into my brain, but then moved on for several years. And about a year and a half ago or so, I was on a backpacking trip up in the mountains in Colorado, and I had my headphones on most of the time, and I was listening to the Girard lectures that Audible has up there. I think they have like 8 of them, and that was kind of one of those moments. I'd have these. Girard is one of those people, one of the few people who really reoriented the whole way I think about the world, the way I think about Christianity. And I had kind of forgotten that. And being up there in the mountains, these beautiful mountains, coming along, come up over a ridge and you see a big valley, and it's right as you've been listening to something that is just hitting you really, really hard. So that was probably one of them. I
had a moment kind of like that. And I was reading Gil Bailey's book, who's a contemporary of Rene Girard, you probably know. And he had a book called God's Gamble. And I was in Israel. Actually, I was in the city of Jericho. And we were standing in a tel where they had the old temple. And the guide pointed up at the mountain and said, that's traditionally considered to be, the Mount of Temptation for Christ. And it dawned on me, I said, wait a second, that gives so much more color to Girard's hypothesis about how the principalities and the world systems are all kind of based on this hidden sacrificial violence that makes the world go round in ancient societies. Because I'm standing...
And only ancient ones?
Yeah, not only ancient ones, but the point that I thought was interesting was, to me, I was like, okay, so he's saying Jesus was traditionally thought to be overlooking this landscape here, at that mountain. And I'm like, well, that makes more sense when Satan is saying, hey, you can have all the kingdoms of the world. And he would be looking at the heart of old Jericho, where they were doing, that was the temple for human sacrifices for many years for the moon god. Right. And I thought, wow, that's right. That brings more color to that scene instead of just a random, kind of, yeah, you can have all the power. Well, he would be overlooking the actual sacrificial temple at the heart of Jericho if that is the traditional, if that really was the site where that happened, so.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So, I wanted to have you on because, you've, again, just to reiterate, you kind of have gotten into a new context with that thread that you did about Trump supporters being disenfranchised. And I've seen that it seems like you're talking more about contemporary current events after that happened, right? Kind of adjusting to the new audience that you've gained since that happened. And Trump was reading. I remember that I'd seen your thread and I watched the clips from the Trump rally that I think it was a few days later and he was over there reading it. And I said, wow, you don't typically see him reading a Twitter thread from a smart, savvy podcaster like this. This is interesting.
It was pretty surreal. Yeah. So I think at the time that happened, I think I had 7,000 followers on Twitter, maybe, I don't know how many listeners at the time, but since then it's obviously exploded. So I think, to touch on one thing you said about talking about more contemporary issues in politics more since that happened, I think that's actually a good example of, Girard's mimetic thesis. In a sense, you look at social media, I think, especially Twitter, it's almost like a mimetic machine, right? I mean, Peter Thiel recognized that about Facebook, and right. Twitter, I think, is almost the condensed essence of it, in the sense that, as we interact with people in our lives at any, in person, online, anywhere, we're always making small adjustments to meet the expectations of others, accommodate others, fit in with others, etc. That's just how we are, right? We're ultra social creatures and very sensitive to the opinions and expressions of other people, and we make these minor adjustments as we go along. And when you have one audience on social media that's listened to you because they heard my Israel-Palestine podcast or my Jim Jones podcast, and then all of a sudden I get massive influx of people who are posting about politics and everything, you almost make this unconscious, you veer unconsciously off in the direction of the people that you're kind of surrounding yourself with and talking to. And it's something that takes place at a very, very deep level that, you don't even do it consciously. Like I
Right.
certainly didn't decide to start doing that. Sometimes I'll go back and look at my feed and realize that I've only really talked about politics and contemporary issues for the last month,
It's kind of like you had a throwaway song on the B side of the tape, and all of a sudden that takes off on radio, and you're like, y'all like that the best? Okay, I guess we'll play that from now on, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, it's certainly true. You don't really know. The whims of the crowd are really kind of mysterious, right? You don't really know what is the thing that'll just trigger this, like you said, a mimetic snowballing where everybody's like, whoa, this thread really nails it, but that thread did nail it. I mean, because you were basically touching on, you were trying to explain, I guess, the psychological state of mind that millions of people who are disparaged by our, elite class of talking heads or whatever, what they're really feeling. And you were trying to basically, in my opinion, showing some deep empathy for where their headspace is and their emotional state, right?
Sure. I mean, because these are my people. Like these are my aunts and uncles and grandparents, and just all the people I grew up with, the community I grew up with. And we've moved into a period, an era when, I don't know if it's unprecedented. I mean, you could probably go back to the way the Northern press treated the South in the 1850s and some other examples, but where you have such a consensus among the elite class, right? I guess like in our age, call it like the professional managerial class, the media class, et cetera. Just such a consensus of hostility and contempt for a very large part of the population. I think about like my grandparents. My grandparents would always watch they like the late night TV shows, like Jay Leno, and they'd watch that stuff all the way back to like Johnny Carson and probably whoever was before that. And it was like a nightly ritual as they got older. They loved watching that stuff in the evening, and they can't watch that stuff anymore because it's just an hour of them being made fun of and mocked and insulted. And I don't think you can really explain to people who are on the other side of that, who are the ones clapping like seals for, Jimmy Kimmel when he makes fun of my grandparents. It's very hard to explain to those people what a system shock that shift has been, and how alienating it really is.
I mean, why do you think it's so different now than it was back then, the Carson era, where people could come together and enjoy some laughs and get along, versus, where we're at now, where it's just this hostile political, lecturing and insults, and it's punching down, as I saw Christopher Rufo put it, people like Jimmy Kimmel and so forth, they're punching down at people who are less powerful than them, at least from their perception. And it doesn't have that fun that used to be there for everybody to come together around.
Yeah, I mean, just based on the timing, it's hard not to attribute some of it to the rise of social media, right? I mean, I have a friend who you would actually have a great conversation with. I'll put you guys in touch after this, named Brian Francis Culkin, and he's written several books. He's huge into Girard, and he wrote a book most recently on Trump, COVID, and Rene Girard, like kind of in that context. And the way he put it is, he called Twitter specifically a human sacrifice machine. It's like a virtual human sacrifice temple, where the whole structure of it is essentially built to identify targets, gin up a mob against them, and destroy them. And that's really like the core of how it works. And you see it even, it's interesting now with this crisis we see in Ukraine, that mentality has really spread to the way we handle geopolitics. You remember during when Trump was in office, and he met with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, and just people were absolutely apoplectic that Trump was friendly with him, was just polite, just generally polite, right, with another world leader, that he was polite with Kim Jong-un. Right. And it's like, people really wanted him to like go spit in his face or something like that. And it's like, that's just, it's that interpersonal, like domestic politics that we've developed over the last several years on social media, kind of exported to our foreign policy. And it's very destabilizing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is a Girardian apocalyptic explanation for this, which would be kind of like, well, I guess there's different ways to look at it, but you have 2,000 years of Christianity kind of undermining the sacrificial, pecking order of hierarchies mediated by sacrifice and differentiation. And as that continues to break down with the evolution of media, I think social media arising is very important here. Like you said, you create this crisis of undifferentiation where everybody's trying to figure out where their boundaries are, right? Because, I mean, just think about, what Girard says about an external mediator, someone who's way out of your range of social connection with, versus an internal mediator, someone who's right down the road, who's got a car slightly better than yours. You're going to have a lot more temptation to have rivalry, and opportunity to have rivalry and conflict with the person who's closer to your internal space socially or economically, or in terms of fame or whatever, than you would someone who's an icon like Don Quixote emulating the chivalrous knights that he knew about, or someone wanting to imitate Elvis. That's someone that's an external mediator of desire. You're not going to run into conflict. But when you have the president of the United States like Donald Trump kind of profaning the sacred aura of the state by misspelling words on Twitter at 3 a.m., it kind of ruins the grandeur and the majesty of what the state kind of had going for it in terms of the minds of most people, right? It kind of ruins it, and it brings the presidency and the office and everything about it closer from an external mediator of desire to an internal mediator of desire, that, hey, I might be able to tweet and he might actually be able to see me, and I can vent my resentment, and I might be able to get the dunk tank guy in chief attention here at 3 a.m. as he tweets out some misspelling attack against Rosie O'Donnell while he's in the White House.
Yeah, the Trump phenomenon is very interesting, right? And you can even maybe say, relate this to the Vladimir Putin as well. Is there's an interesting question in Girardian theory. I don't know if Girard himself, it's been a while since I've really dug in, if he addresses this himself, but the question of once I'll put it this way, back up a little bit actually. So I think like when you go back to 2016 during the election period there, all of the just unmatched vitriol that was, that the other side felt for Donald Trump, was essentially that half of society, trying to create a sacrificial crisis. They'd identified their victim. This was the guy. And they wanted the other side to like get on board so they could have that unanimity that, that the mimetic crisis requires.
Right.
But the problem was that Trump was just too strong. Like he was too strong for them to single out and destroy. He had too much support, with force of personality, force of the office. He ended up holding all of those things. He ended up being too strong for them to consummate the sacrifice. And, the question of like, what happens when a mob gets fully charged up? They have their victim, for their part, they are fully up into the sacrificial crisis mode, but then they can't consummate it. And where does that energy go? And how does it flow? And I think that's kind of what we're seeing now, right? You've seen, people talk about how everybody from maybe like those Covington Catholic boys to Judge Kavanaugh to, just all of the different moral panics and hysterias we've had over the last several years. People have talked about that being like, a transference from the rage they feel for Trump, but it's an impotent rage because they couldn't reach him. They couldn't get to him, and they were selecting other victims that were more nearby that they could get to. And, that's why, gosh, I mean, it really seems like for the last 5 or 6 years, not only our politics, but our sort of has been just one long line of witch hunts and moral panics and hysterias after another. As soon as one ends, they've got another one queued up.
It's kind of like how Vietnam was like an attempt to do a sacrificial war that would unite people cathartically, and it didn't, and then it resulted in riots and all the stuff we saw, back then. So you're right. When you fail to create unanimous cathartic release around an agreed upon scapegoat, that violent energy bubbles up, and it just makes a chaos all over the community, right? Which was why, Girard suggests why, these archaic societies stumbled upon this social mechanism to relieve tension in the first place, because if you don't, create a believable scapegoat that everybody can believe is truly guilty of the kind of chaos that people feel, that chaos would just kind of devour the community in a kind of war of all against all, which I think we're going to continue to see. So we're in this weird moment where, I know you've critiqued libertarianism, but I and I'm not saying libertarianism is what Girard was talking about at all, but it does seem like there's a breakdown of the state that's taking place because of kind of Christianity's influence in our culture and how that has spread worldwide by globalism, which is kind of this idea that once the sacrificial cat is out of the bag, once we see how the sausage making of scapegoating happens, it doesn't bind us together. It's like temporary little schisms, that are always shooting off from one another because they can't create a kind of universal agreed upon scapegoat to bind the community together, right? That's kind of how the world functions.
In order to reach that level of frenzy, that the sacrificial crisis requires, you really have to work yourself up into just a real froth. You have to convince yourself that the target is, evil incarnate, that they're the cause of all the community's problems, enough that you can generate this, this unanimous social consensus that allows you to take actions that in normal times with other non-guilty people would be morally wrong to actions to take. And so you have to work yourself up to that point. And part of like a corollary to that is anybody who refuses to go along is also irredeemably evil. And I think you can look around our society and see that floating around pretty prominently.
So that's the question we're at. And I think folks that have kind of looked at this work of Girard and see its kind of evidence of it around us is, where do we go from here? Because, you see that happening right now with the deal with Ukraine and Russia. Whereas if you want to have a kind of objective analysis, that's considered the stench of Putin is on you. You know, it's like you're the guy that they're trying to burn Margaret at the stake for being a witch. You're like, I don't really think she caused the plague, folks. I think it's this thing growing on this corpse's nose. This looks like something that caused this issue for us. Maybe we don't need to burn her this time. They're like, what do you mean? Are you in league with her? Did you have, evil
you see this
rituals with her?
You see this especially with people within the left or progressive side of the aisle. How, think about somebody like Tulsi Gabbard. If you go down Tulsi Gabbard's her basic politics, the policy choices that she would, prefer. She's a Democrat. She's a progressive Democrat. And they despise her more than, not as much as Donald Trump, but probably more than Ron DeSantis. Like, they despise her a lot. And you have to ask, well, why? She doesn't say anything offensive. She's very moderate in most of her views. And it's because she refuses to display hatred and hostility for, Trump, MAGA people, Trump supporters, whatever that however you want to identify that side of the aisle. That's why they hate her, because she won't go along with the mob. And, when you're in that kind of a frenzy, that is the greatest sin, is to not go along, because anybody who doesn't go along is, they're kind of a threat to everything. People see that, see somebody standing up to it, somebody willing to be martyred because, they tell the crowd, if you're going to get to them, you have to go through me. That has the potential to break the spell and snap everybody out of it. And, the problem obviously is, once you've worked yourself up into a sacrificial crisis mode, snapping out of it means realizing that you have been, engaged in behavior and thought patterns that are not going to be very flattering.
Right. It's kind of like, just to give an analogy of how it feels, what we're talking about. It's like, if you ever went to see, a Star Wars movie in its premiere. I remember when they had that prequel trilogy, and they had the scene. We were nerds all watching the midnight premiere, and there's the scene where Yoda finally gets his little lightsaber out, and you say, "Oh my goodness!" The crowd was just ecstatic. And imagine someone turns on the lights there and says, "This is fake. This is a movie," and it just totally interrupts the entire ecstatic experience of watching your hero defeat this villain and all this. It's kind of like that when Tulsi Gabbard's like, well, yeah, I agree with you. Universal health care. Yeah, I agree with you. Climate change. Yeah, I agree with you. This and that. But yeah, let's not hate them. That's the same kind of feeling that they're feeling. It's someone turning on the lights in your favorite movie at the best scene.
Yeah, because if you're behaving in this manner towards somebody who is anything less than the devil that you set them up as, then you're kind of the devil,
Right. So this almost like this we've everybody notes now that there's a religiosity to politics that they didn't really seem to observe before. And I would suggest that the reason why you can see it more now is because it's not functioning the way it should function in terms of pacifying the community and working in a really well-oiled way, right? And so it's always the state is always the domain of the sacred in some sense, from a Girardian standpoint, but you can't really see it as well until it stops functioning well, because then you kind of see it's like, why do we say the word cult in a pejorative way more than like religion? It's because, cults, you can kind of see their spellbinding effect, their groupthink behavior, because it's different from a more dominant cultural, ideology or religion around us. So their distinctiveness and their, zealous beliefs kind of stand out like a sore thumb. And it's the same thing with the state. It's like the state is always kind of a cult-like structure, but you don't really call it cult-like until you see its different manifestations like wokeism and so forth, or COVID mania look, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not functioning well. It's not a well-oiled consensus that, yeah, we should all be vilifying the unvaccinated, right? That didn't work. It was
right.
And so when it doesn't work, we see the religiosity of the state. Do you see that?
Yeah. One of the, like the prerogative of the king like one of the chief prerogatives of the king has always been that he decides who is eligible for sacrifice and who's immune, right? You can go back. There are a lot of, ancient cultures in India, East Africa, famously, a lot of other places where they had a ritual of regular sacrifice of the king himself. There's a story out of East Africa, usually comes down with the name, the ruin of Kash, Kasch. And it's this ancient kingdom, and the king was sacrificed. It was understood that sort of like in Ursula Le Guin's book, her short story, The Ones Who Walked Away from Omelas, that this violent action was absolutely required if society was not going to start going downhill and fall apart. And, eventually the astrologers who kind of track the stars so that they know the specific time that it's supposed to happen, something happens with one of them. I think he falls in love with somebody, and like the chief astrologer. And so they lose track and they miss the sacrifice, and it stops. And once it stops, the society just goes downhill and falls apart. And I think you can take that and it's not an astrologer who falls in love and misses the clock or something. Maybe it's just that the king eventually, maybe the king gets sacrificed 20 generations in a row, but then you're finally going to get one who gets there and says, well, I'm supposed to be sacrificed every 8 years. Yeah. It's the 7th year and I don't really feel like being sacrificed. And so I'm going to appoint a substitute, or I'm going to put somebody else there. And it's the king's prerogative to do that. If you look at a lot of societies with untouchable classes, there's always, or I shouldn't say always, I haven't studied all of them, but like in Hawaii, pre-contact Hawaii, for example, is a fantastic example of it, where, they had an untouchable class, just like the Shudras in India. I mean, they had to live in a certain part of the island. They couldn't leave. They weren't allowed to speak to, let alone touch anybody from any of the other classes. The penalty was death if they did. Just a real, like, hardcore outcast class. And they couldn't interact with anybody on the island, anything like that, except the king. The king could interact with them freely, and he did. And he would often keep some of them around as it's almost as if you have the person at the very top and he can only relate to somebody at the other extreme, because they're kind of up there alone on the mountain.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And that's one of the problems. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I just wanted to let you finish.
The Hawaiian example, if people really want to read about a very interesting culture with a lot to say about early cultural development, pre-contact Hawaii is really good, partly because we have decent information, but also because, pre-contact Hawaii was not quite at the level of, say, the hieratic city-states that we consider the first civilizations in Sumeria and Egypt and so forth. They weren't quite there at their level of social and political development, but they definitely were not like tribes. This was a developing civilization. They were getting there. And so you start to see, for example, human sacrifice. When you see large scale human sacrifice, it's usually in this narrow band of development where you'll see human sacrifice with primitive cultures, obviously, but where it's large scale and systematic, it happens in this transition period between primitive society and civilization. And once you kind of reach the point where the civilization has been consummated, you'll still see human sacrifice. I mean, or sacrifice in general. The Romans sacrificed a couple humans when Hannibal was at the gates just because they were frightened, right? So you still see that kind of stuff. But it starts to drop in importance, and they start to find sublimated substitutes rather than carrying it out literally with human sacrifice or even animal sacrifice. And Hawaii's very interesting for that stuff. There was this one annual festival. It's kind of one of those periods that a lot of cultures have where it's at the end of the year, and there's a few days where all the rules and all of the taboos are thrown out for a few days, right? And you would have commoners coupling with nobility. You would have just anything that was typically taboo was not. It was this period of kind of chaos and regeneration, they believed. And one of the things they would do is the king And the king in pre-contact Hawaii was like semi-divine, just, he was not just a political leader, he was a sacred figure. And he would sort of recline on a mat, and his people would come up to him and they would spit on him and throw urine at him and throw feces and dirt at him and just call him names and abuse him. And this would happen like one day out of their year. And, there's a lot to unpack with a festival like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And right now we have almost like that level of taboo breaking, like as the new normal, right? As our new kind of consecrated standard of behavior, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned like the need for people to differentiate themselves. And so you run into like the vanity of small differences, that really causes the most serious hostility between people. And I think that you could almost define maybe the defining aspect of modernity. You mentioned the sort of vanity of small differences and how the need for people to differentiate themselves from people who are largely similar often creates much more intense rivalry than people who are very, very different. Right. And, in a way you could frame modernity in general, like the modern project in general, is this mass process of homogenization of human beings and cultures, right? There's a lot there's a lot less to differentiate somebody who live in, say, different regions of the country or even different countries today than there were in the past. There's superficial differences, somebody has face tattoos or, a pierced nose or whatever, but these are superficial things that are probably largely a result of what you're talking about here. Is this need to differentiate yourself in a culture that's becoming increasingly homogenous. And,
right.
Yeah, and I think, which
fits very nicely with the theory that Girard says that, with Christianity, it disrupts the hierarchy of differentiation mediated by sacrifice, and it breaks the sacred, which was our kind of noble lie, and it put that in quotes, a noble lie that had kept humanity together. Now that noble lie is broken, and that's what Nietzsche understood on a visceral and intuitive level, that Christianity had unleashed something which was going to create this chaos of resentment, and this breaking down of the order of the good old days of when the beautiful people.
Yeah, it was like Girard said, right? It unleashed that thing that had been hidden since the foundation of the world. You go all the way back to, well, like what Girard says about the first murder of Abel by Cain. And one of the ways he puts it, I love. He says that Abel didn't have to kill Cain because he had his blood sacrifice already. He was sacrificing animals, and Cain didn't have that, and that's why he killed Abel. That's very interesting,
Exactly. That's why maybe some of those vegans have some vicious, hateful political views, because they need to get some steak in them or something.
Vegans, but also you could take it to it's plenty of people have remarked on the fact that the people who base their entire political outlook on compassion and empathy and tolerance it's just after the last several years, you just simply can't really deny anymore that by and large, you get on the wrong side of those people and they are nastier than any other group that you're going to find.
Yeah, like those guys that have those yard signs that say hate has no home here. Those are some nasty homes that go in there for dinner.
Yeah, right. Right. And, maybe it's just, part of it is that when your politics are based on a sort of almost religious sense of your own righteousness, then you're going to identify your opposition as evil. But, it may also just be that you can only carry around a fake smile for so long before you need to punch somebody in the face just to stay sane.
So, what's interesting here, again, so you're touching on so many good themes here. And, you're talking about this idea that the more alike we are, the more we have a temptation to have conflict and rivalry. That's so true. I mean, that's why Tulsi Gabbard is hated by the left more than conservatives. They hate her more than their own rivals and conservatives. Or, for example, libertarians fight over open borders or closed borders is the defining thing about libertarian. So the closer you are, the more vicious and nasty your squabbles are going to be. That's kind of like why those societies of yore would look at the arrival of identical twins as a harbinger for chaos that would be coming upon the. So the closer you are, the more temptation there is for rivalry, which can break out into disorder and dysfunction. So I guess having that as our framework, how do you navigate such a time? I mean, it is truly an apocalyptic, unprecedented time in global history where we have basically global carnival as our new standard of what we're supposed to act on as a normative, the idea of the dissolution of gender, the dissolution of boundaries of class. Now, like I said earlier, you can even you can be an ordinary peasant and get a swing on the president of the United States on Twitter now in a kind of, virtual reality way. There's this undifferentiation that's continually accelerating. And the question is, how do you even have governance in such a context, right?
Yeah, well, we're kind of in a period right now where we have government by the mob, right? Mob dynamics run our politics right now. And if you look at this is especially true on the left right now. The right has gone through different periods where they kind of switch off how these things go. But right now it's been the left where like every major sort of policy question or, whether it's a Supreme Court justice that's getting nominated, like it's the new voting rights law that they've been trying to pass since Biden got elected, whatever it is. If you watch the way it develops, like they're not trying to convince anybody these are good ideas. They go out and say that the people who favor this are good, the people who don't favor that are bad, and they whip up a mob to go after the bad people. I mean, that's how they tried to stop the Kavanaugh confirmation. It's how they just up and down the line. This is like kind of the governance by mob that we have now. It's it's very hard to figure out because as a Christian, especially, the natural impulse when you see a lot of this stuff is to want to go punch the bully in the face, right? You want to go confront this. You see this dissolution happening in your society, and you say, well, what are strong men supposed to, who care about their society and the place that their children are going to grow up, supposed to do? You have to go out and stop this, right? When you've got the other side in such a frenzy where stopping them, they're not going to stop on their own. Like they'd have to be stopped. That's like a natural response for anybody to have in a situation like this. On the other hand, it's hard to square that in a way with Christian beliefs. I think of think about one thing that's very interesting is like it wasn't preachers that spread Christianity in the early days. It was the example of martyrs. Like those were the stories that got shared around and these incidents where people would see people dying this converted masses of people. And then these stories,
and look how that fits so nicely as a critique on the sacrificial victim, that a martyr is now reversing what sacrificial victims did to glue the original society together, It's interesting.
That's right. And so if you ask what is a martyr in the Christian context, and you have to limit it to the Christian context, right? Because others have their own versions of it. You can go blow yourself up in a cafe in some places and be called a martyr. But in the Christian context, people often think of a martyr as somebody who dies for their beliefs. You're, I don't know, just an extreme example. Somebody puts a gun to your head and says, denounce God and embrace the devil, and you say no, and they shoot you, right? And that's a martyr, and it certainly is a martyr. But like the preponderance of martyrs that are in that we see in early Christianity, and I think just in general, like the way to think of a martyr is not somebody who necessarily dies for Jesus Christ. It's somebody who chooses to die with him, right? That if you come upon a scene where the crowd has arrayed itself before its chosen victim, and they've all picked up their rocks, and they're all looking back and forth at the person side to side to make sure that everybody else, including you, are fully on board, that you must, I really believe that like it is the core Christian command is that thou shalt not get sucked in.
You cut out a little bit. You said thou shalt not. Wait, you cut out a little bit. You said thou shalt not get sucked into what? I just want to make sure we hear the punchline.
Thou shalt not get sucked into a mob ever under any circumstances.
Exactly.
That is the devil possessing you. And
Amen.
it's the ultimate sacrifice of your soul to do that. And so, you come upon a scene and you see the selected victim and the people ready to stone them. And this could be figurative, right? That maybe they're not going to kill the person. Maybe you're in school and there's a bunch of bullies got a bunch of kids making fun of somebody. To be strong enough to stand up and, if necessary, become a martyr. To say that I can't live with myself if I join this, but even if I walk away from this and leave it alone. I know, when I was a kid in school, we all had these instances. I think everybody had them where, you're there and there's a bully or a group of bullies and they're all picking on someone much weaker who can't do anything about it. And, sometimes, especially as I got older into high school, I would step in and I would say something and put a stop to it if I could, or at the very least, absorb some of their abuse myself, redirect it to give the kids some relief. But sometimes I didn't. We all had those moments probably one time or another. And I tell you what, things that happened, the times that I didn't, the times that I saw that mob abusing somebody, it could have been when I was in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I'm 40 years old now. I remember those incidents like they were yesterday, and they still bring me shame. Yeah. Because we know on some level what's going on there, that you're in the presence of the devil. And if you cower before the devil, you will not forgive yourself for it.
And that's the heart and soul of what the leftist project is taking that Christian aesthetic and ethic and then hijacking it to try to revivify the pagan sacred of sacrifice, right? Because at the core of the leftist project is it's a Christian heresy, what leftism is and globalism is. It's just Christian heresy. And I would say conservatism and nationalism is just another weaker Christian heresy that's trying to fight a more powerful Christian heresy in the leftist globalist project, because that's what the left does. It's like that scene in Batman with the Joker and, Jack Nicholson, where he puts on, Batman's got him cornered and he puts on glasses and says, you wouldn't hit a man with glasses, would you? And that's the idea behind leftism is you wouldn't hit a man who's just trying to protect this transgender person to be able to swim with everybody else. This is what they truly feel. Do you know how many times transgender people have been picked on? You know how many times they've been beaten up by the same crowd, Darryl, that you walk by? It's like, and so they hijack that true visceral Christian sensibility of concern for victims, because we know that in a lot of cultures, even to this day, if someone is doing a gender bender, they may get really hurt, right? And so that, especially in more conservative societies around the world, you can have some real trouble with that if it's not done in its proper context of sacred ritual, as we know, the androgynous history of the sacred.
You're kind of describing the mechanism by which Nietzsche foresaw Christianity being destroyed, like in his vision, which is, that the very precepts of Christianity, compassion and tolerance and empathy and especially empathy for the victim and pity for the weak, that as those things worked their way through society, as they reached a point where people didn't even have to be religious or Christian to have internalized all of them, because it's just so worked through our culture, that it was just going to naturally have an undermining effect, because people, if you look at Turks, people who live in Turkey, you're not going to find a lot of Turks that feel a lot of guilt about the Armenian genocide, even the ones who know that it happened, right? It's
because they're not as gospel infected.
That's right. And so in Christian societies, and this was happening in Nietzsche's time, and it's really obviously accelerated in the 20th and 21st centuries, is we look back on the history of our culture. Just history is obviously a bloody mess, and we have had plenty of ours spilled, and we spilled plenty of it. And we look back with shame and disgust on our history, on even our current culture, because it's true, there are people who are desperately poor in America. Right. There are people who are abused, groups, say transgender people are they faced a lot of problems, various things like that are all true. Go back, to Jim Crow or slavery, whatever it is, that in a Christian society, it's going to undermine their faith and confidence in their own culture and in themselves so much that you end up sawing off the branch that you're sitting on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's one thing I've wanted to ask a lot of friends who are into Girardian anthropology and understand the current events and how they kind of connect is, how can a Christian society, like, here's a question. Well, this is I don't know. I just put it out there and see what, why would God create a revelation that basically destroys any nation that gets a hold of it but doesn't actually practice it correctly? So, for example, it's almost like, you look at China or these other cultures that are not as Christian infected. They are somewhat, right, because of the West influence.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
We still, like, the standards that we have kind of put out there, they at least still feel a need to pay lip service to.
Right. Exactly.
That's how powerful it is.
And that's why, in some sense, it's like globalism is kind of like a bait that Jesus can use to his own ends, because it's a heresy of Christianity, but it still has enough of the real thing to kind of spark that kind of, empathetic course correction in the cultures that experience it, right? Through its perverted and mutated form in Hollywood films and so forth. There's still a kernel, like for example, Jurassic Park, the Lost Kingdom or whatever, where the end of the movie is, should we exterminate these resurrected monsters from the past, or is that too sacrificially violent? Now, I guess we're going to have to let them loose and let velociraptors onto the suburbs of America rather than to sacrifice these poor animals. In the old days, they wouldn't even think, what the heck are you talking about? It's a freaking monster from hell. Of course we're going to gut it and rip its intestines out and put it on the doorposts of our Capitol building just to show what we've done. Now we're so Christianized that we get that cathartic empathy with the damn dinosaurs that we've resurrected as hell spawns, and we're so self-sacrificing that we'd rather let T-Rex eat our dog in the backyard than to sacrifice T-Rex. So we're so anti-sacrificial because we're so haunted by the cross, but we don't know what to do with that, right? And so I guess my question is, how is Christianity supposed to function if its revelation happens in different doses around the world? It seems like the cultures that don't get as heavy doses of the Christian revelation of sacrifice will be able to eventually gobble up the chaotic societies that have the Christian revelation but don't abide by it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that is actually a very good question. I think one of the more interesting sort of mysterious lines in the Bible is when Jesus says, I haven't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill the law, right? I thought about that a lot, like, over the years when I was younger and now, and like, it's kind of, like, all the meaning is implied, right? He's not exactly saying anything like specific. He's not spelling it out for you. And so I go back to, like, the Jewish law, the Old Testament law, and think, like, the purpose of what does it mean to be the chosen people? To a Christian, it means that the Jews were chosen to be the vessel that would give, from which Christ would emerge, right? And if you go through the Old Testament, whether it's the Song of the Servant, whether it's, a lot of the Psalms, just throughout the thing, you recognize that you have this people, the Jews, who, they were a small people. They got kicked around a lot. They got conquered by the Babylonians, beat up by the Assyrians, exiled by the Romans. Like, they were a small people in the crossroads of empire, and they got kicked around just like a million other peoples did, most of whom we've never heard of, or we just know their names. The Jewish innovation, or the Hebrew innovation, was that they figured out they figured out how to write down and remember their culture and their identity so that it would survive conquest and it would survive exile. And so what you have is, like, normally you have, like, a people rise up and they start a kingdom, and they reach their apogee, and then they either decline or they get conquered. And then when that happens, they pass from the scene. Like, it's very rare you see them reemerge a century or two later with the same intact social identity and sense of, like, a continuity of their history and everything. Well, the Jews would go through these ups and downs. They knew what it was like to be persecuted, and they had a cultural memory of it because their history was really, like, that was their sacred, their sort of sacred object was their collective history. And so you have this people who know what it's like to be a victim and to be persecuted. And so you have this throughout the Old Testament that, like, if you ask, like, this Christian idea that would subvert sacrifice, like, where could that come from? Like, it couldn't have come from, the Romans or like, pagans like that. They just, you read about how the Romans how they understood the Christian message, and they just thought it was completely insane. It was so far outside of their understanding of the world that, like, if you're a good person, if you're favored by the gods, well, that's going to mean that you're powerful and you're strong. And the people who get kicked around, those people are clearly not favored by the gods, and they're not as good of people. And you're not going to get the gospel message that's just going to emerge out of that. It's just not going to happen. The Jews were this people who had sort of had 1,000 years of preparation to be able to give rise to that idea in the person of Christ. And when Jesus says, I come not to destroy, but to fulfill the law, I think the limitation that the Hebrews had, and I think there's a lot of evidence for this in the Gospels themselves when Jesus is interacting with the Pharisees and talking to them, that the Jews did get that. They got that they understood the sacrificial mechanism. They saw it, they understood it, they saw it work, they knew what it was like to be on the receiving end of it. But the religion, kind of because of the nature of it, the chosen people and all that, it was exclusive to the in-group, and they didn't apply it to the whole world. And so, the Amalekites still had to be destroyed. The Egyptians and the Romans and the Greeks were still just blood enemies, and exactly, yeah. It's this like, in Jesus, what changed, obviously, when the Gospels came, is that idea that had been latent in the Old Testament got pushed out and spread to mankind in general. And, I think, Gerard obviously loves to talk about the Barabbas incident near the end of the Gospels, where the crowd chooses Barabbas. And it's one of the most important, I think, facts of the whole Bible, who Barabbas was, right? Sometimes he gets called a murderer, but usually he's called a rabble rouser, right? This was a revolutionary.
Yeah, this is a William Wallace that we would pay a lot of money to watch a movie about.
Yes, there you go. And so this is a guy who, you think, like, in the time of Christ, in the time leading up to it, say since the Greek conquest and the Maccabean revolt and everything, the Romans had come back in and reconquered the Levant, and the Jews are not happy about that. They had managed to get the Greeks off their back with the Maccabean revolt. Now they're conquered again, and there's this revolutionary ferment, which in a lot of ways, like, we could look at and be like, when we read about it in the 1770s in New England, we're like, hell yeah, right? Like, it's like there's a lot of positive feelings we get from that kind of thing. They want their independence. They don't want to be, under somebody else's boot. And so you have this really, really, like, deep feeling on the Jewish street during this period. And then you have this guy come along who's from Galilee, and they make note of that all the time. They call him the Galilean, right? And that was kind of a slur because that was a very heavily Hellenized area. And so those people were kind of known as being, like, a little bit too close to the outsiders, too close to the Greeks. And he comes in and he starts, like, they're talking about, like, we're going to revolt against the Romans or whatever it is. Like, you're going down the wrong path. This is only going to lead to cycles of further destruction and hatred. And, here's this other path. He says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and so on and so forth. Things that, when you're in a period, like, you go into Boston in 1775 and say, render unto Britain what is Britain's. They do not want to hear that, right? And so you get up to that final sacrificial crisis where they're ready to put Jesus on the cross, and they get offered these two divergent paths of reconciliation and, moving away from this sacrificial mechanism, or are we going to embrace, the path of revolution, which is really the idea that, and this is a very tempting idea that, everybody thinks maybe in some general sense you shouldn't persecute people, but it's okay to persecute the persecutors.
Right.
And that's Satan casting out Satan, right?
That's right. In the early gospel text, Barabbas's name is Jesus. You know that, right? It's in there.
That's right. Yeah, that is right.
So it's a tale of two.
Forget that for some reason.
It's a tale of two Jesuses. It's such a brilliant text. It's divinely penetrative to the human heart and politics and everything, because you're thinking, how in the heck did they come up? If this was just mere humans coming up with this story, this is beyond any. This is a miracle beyond all miracles. But this idea that you've got at the end a tale of two Jesus. So which is it's like Jesus has been preaching this message. Most of his followers and crowds are not getting it completely. They keep thinking he's going to be Bernie Sanders. He's going to run a revolution right up to the power structure and overthrow the 1% on behalf of the 99%. I know I'm making a little bit
sure,
but same kind of feeling, or William Wallace, and he doesn't. And so it's a satire on everything that moves us, because all the big box office movies are still kind of trying to give us William Wallace, still trying to give us Jesus Barabbas instead of Jesus of Nazareth, right? And even Christians of all different sects still kind of have a Barabbas model of Jesus in mind when they worship Jesus, because it's more like, I say it's kind of like the Jesus that is like Hercules, like which God am I supposed to pay tribute to? It's the Jesus guy now. Okay, we pay tribute to you. We do, and it's kind of like basically a kind of objectification of Jesus, rather than seeing him as the subject of your life that you're supposed to imitate. He's just an object that you kind of pay homage to. And I explain that like the metaphor is the moment when you're in the Sea of Galilee, the storm's raging, Jesus is walking on water, and rather than getting out of the boat and imitating Jesus, we basically stay in the boat and just say, man, you're Hercules. I love it. You're awesome. Where do I write my check? You're my new Hercules. You're my new God. I'm going to stay in this boat. That's where Christianity typically puts Jesus, right? There's no desire.
It reminds you of, there's in one of Paul's epistles, it's one of the, maybe Galatians, I can't remember, but there's this scene where he goes there and to the city and to meet with the church he set up. And when he gets there, he finds that they're all worshiping Jesus. They're there, but they're bringing out a cow to sacrifice in his honor. And he's like, no, what are you doing? This is the opposite of what you're supposed to be doing.
Why do you think that? Well, I mean, why do you think that the anti-sacrificial critique in the Gospels is still lost on much of Christendom, whether we go to Catholicism or Orthodoxy or Protestantism?
It's such a great question, because and I've heard this from so many people, and certainly myself, that when you read Girard, that part of it, it's so obvious. Like once you see it and you go through and you read the Gospels and everything, and you're like, oh, this was always here. Like, how did I ever not realize that this was just the overriding theme that was going on here? That's a good question. I mean, I think there's maybe it goes back. I know Girard likes to talk about, the idea of ransom, right, and how the idea used to be early on that in order for you to be saved, you needed to have your ransom paid to the devil, that he had some purchase on you that had to be dealt with. And over time, when you got to St. Anselm and so forth, that kind of changed, where the idea was, you are walking a tightrope over a lake of fire, and there's an angry God, like ready, jealous, and if you're a corrupt creature due to original sin, and the ransom that you owe is to God for being sinful. And that's a massive change, right? And that's kind of been the overriding idea, though, for quite a long time.
Right. Yeah, it's so fascinating. What do you take when you see Psalm 2 say, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers gather together against the Lord and against his anointed one. On the cross, if you don't have that kind of sacrificial critique in mind, that statement doesn't really have a lot of, it doesn't really connect on a deep narrative level.
Yeah, and
right?
the whole idea of like, I know a lot of good Christians who just sort of don't think about it because they struggle with, the idea of like, wait a second. So even, whether from a moral standpoint or just a logical standpoint, that God created us, he's omnipotent. He could have created us however he wanted. He created us in a way that we, ate the fruit and became sinful. And, it gets, and he's going to send us to hell over this. We're going to burn an eternal fire because of this way that he made us and events that happened before our birth. And therefore he has to, like, he's still a kind of being where he still demands sacrifice, but, because he's compassionate and loves, so loved the world, he sends his son to serve as that sacrifice, but he still requires it. And, I know a lot of good Christians who struggle with that, and it is, it's a thing that they should struggle with because it's hard to understand.
Right. Gerard basically says that it's not God demanding the sacrifice; it's humans that are demanding it, and God working with our ignorance to break the machine from within that humans had constructed to create their gods. Right.
Yes, that's right.
So, but that's something that's a very salacious claim, even in 2022, or maybe, for Christians to even say, right? Because that substitutionary atonement model that Anselm pioneered and so forth has become such a dominant core pinnacle of what it means to be a follower of Christ. And again, whether you're in whatever sect you're in, that's still kind of the dominant thought. And people break people break that doctrine to their own folly because, here's the thing. I don't think that doctrine's correct. I don't think Anselm was right. But the problem with it is the only game in town that challenges Anselm ends up going into social justice, left-wing Christianity, which is a problem on another direction. So there's really no real conversation that does this proper justice. They keep
I think
the traditions of Christianity. Sorry. A little bit of delay.
No, I'm sorry. You go ahead.
I was just saying there's no real proper conversation taking place where we can surgically challenge Anselm in the substitutionary atonement model that's holding back the true significance of some of the things going on in the gospel and the atonement, while at the same time not throwing out the baby with the bathwater and gutting the traditional, moral principles that Christianity. It somehow Anselm and substitutionary atonement got glued together to a lot of the conservative aspects of Christianity, right? Like if you got that, the whole floodgates comes in, and now we're doing wokeism and stuff from the pulpit. You see? Right.
Yeah. And it's always interesting to Christians. The very idea of like taking communion, say, for example, right? Where you're drinking the blood and consuming the flesh of Jesus, which you can look at that and, as a sort of, like you say, you go back far enough in almost any culture of which we have record, and you have evidence of human sacrifice and usually cannibalism. Now, it might be that like by the time we contacted a certain group of people, they had sublimated that to a degree. Right. A lot of them that we find, they engage in it very literally. And I think that like a lot of what social development is, like what it really is, cultural development rather, I should say, is figuring out symbolic substitutions for things that you previously had to do literally, like human sacrifice and cannibalism, in order to satisfy certain things inside you. And you come, you go. So what you see is you go from like human sacrifice to animal sacrifice, and then you go from, animal sacrifice to maybe like dough effigies of an animal, and then you can go like just all the way on up. It gets more and more sort of more symbolic as you go, more sublimated.
But the sacrificial. But even those cultures that are sublimating it to dough effigies, they still are practicing raw sacrifice in the context of, say, war, though, right? So they're still doing that, and they're still.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true too.
So they're channeling it out onto the enemy other outside the camp a little bit, but they're still doing the sacrificial thing of offering up your young men to die on the blood, to shed their blood for the preservation of the community.
That's true. And I mean, I think those sacrificial rituals are largely, or to a large degree, are community binding rituals that are the very thing that allow them to direct that hostility outside the community.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit.
Me too, but it's. I think we're in the right direction. When you look at, the book of Acts, that's one of the first sermons that they Peter and John preach about. They use that Psalms reference about why do the nations rage, right? And I just think that's what I see going on, like in our current events. I see nations raging. I see people plotting in vain. I see kings of the earth rising up, and they're going against what, right? They're going against the kingship of Jesus, right? Which is this idea that I finished your sacrificial system. I've broken it. I fundamentally have destroyed it, but I don't destroy it the way you expect, where I, come and might makes right, Satan casting out Satan, because that would just revivify it. Instead, I expose it nonviolently and hobble it such that now, and I think, Zizek talks about, Christian atheism, right? This idea the death of the big other takes place on the cross, right? Where now you can't wait for some transcendent big other to give you your grounding for what you're going to do. There's this radical distance that takes place between this idea of a traditional big other God and what you have to do in terms of like achieving your ends. Now you have the Holy Spirit community, is what Zizek calls it. I think that fits nicely with this Girardian framework of the death of the transcendent God that's fed by sacrifice, right? Now you have to learn to function together in a nonviolent way without appealing to the old sacred structure of looking for a victim to deify, right? And if you look at what
oh, sorry, I thought you were done.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say real quick, there's this great book, you may have read it, by, I think his name's Richard Elliott Friedman, called The Disappearance of God. And it's an absolutely fantastic book. And one of the things that he spends time on, he kind of like it's divided into three sections. And the first section kind of lays out the theme of the book by showing how throughout the course of the Old Testament, if you arrange the books chronologically, in the Garden of Eden, he's walking next to Adam, in the garden in the cool of the evening. You get up to, say, Abraham. And now at this point, like he's appearing to him, right, with a couple angels. You get up to like Moses, and now it's a pillar of fire. It's getting kind of more symbolic, and you work your way through all the way up until you get to like Ezra, like toward the end after the exile, and it's literally just a political history. Like God doesn't even appear in it, and there's this consistent, gradual pulling back of God, and almost in the way he frames it. And I love this framing of it. Is that, when Adam and Eve were children and humanity is maturing and growing up and learning, how to operate without God coming down and accomplishing miracles all the time just to like correct, historical sort of, like when things go off track or something. And I think it's a very interesting idea that plays out through the Bible. And by the time you get up to Jesus, what does Jesus say? He says, at the climax of this whole process of like the disappearance of God, the gradual pulling back throughout the course of the Old Testament, then he appears in person before us, like in the world, as like the climax of this thing. And what does he say? He says that he's going to pass from the scene. He's going to be martyred, but he's going to leave you the Holy Spirit, and the law of God will be written on the hearts of men. You don't need tablets anymore to be written on the hearts of men. And so, it's almost like this gradual process of like, humanity was a child, and God had to hold us by the hand and kind of walk us through. But as time goes on, the idea is that we'll internalize we'll internalize God's laws to a degree that we can live without that. And, that's what every parent wants for their child, right?
Right. Do you think that's why that fits with the idea of the climactic scene where Jesus dies and the temple is torn and there's no one home? Is that in keeping with God is now leaving us to take care?
Yeah. So I mean, Friedman mentions that, and I think I definitely think it's very interesting.
Yeah. And this idea, why have you forsaken me? The temple is torn, the veil is torn, and there's no Wizard of Oz there. It's just empty, right? It's just like, okay, you're on your own now, guys, in the sense of it's not on your own. It's that, you're on your own with your mistaken belief maybe about the way in which God was always going to be with you, right? If this idea of the Holy Spirit.
Well, you wanted to be a spiritual child, forever, because, this is a crisis that like every adolescent or even young children, it's like, this is a crisis you go through, right? Like a toddler at that level, they go through it, where they're at this critical juncture around 2 years old or so, where, they're developing physically and cognitively enough that they've got a sense of themselves as a separate human being, the separate entity. That's not something that they were born with. They were just this buzzing mass of lights and sounds when they were born. And to be able to actually differentiate, like, okay, I'm me, I'm a separate person from my mother or anybody else, the rest of the world. They've gotten to that point, but that's kind of terrifying. Like there's this urge to want to just sort of be reabsorbed into the mother, and yes. The anxiety of having to be out there on your own, as a self-creating being is frightening. And so they feel this ambivalence where part of them wants to go back and be pulled back into the mother there, but there's a natural impulse toward individuation that also does not want to be annihilated. And so you have this like period of extreme tension in those terrible twos as they're going through that. And the same thing applies to like adolescence, right? It's are you alone once you move out of your parents' house and like go out and get a job and whatever? It's like, no, not exactly. You're not exactly on your own.
Right.
But you have to reach that stage. And I think it's, it's very tempting to want to stay at the level of dependency and childlike, a childlike approach to your relationship with God.
And that's kind of, I think that you just described very nicely kind of the situation we're in culturally, at least, just talking about our own country, America, and what we see going on. And I think people feel, without having a kind of a big anthropological big picture with the Gospels, they feel as if we've just kind of fumbled into this moment of chaos because of, it was Trump and it was social media and it was leftists just lost their mind. And it's like, no, this isn't just happening, right? History is going somewhere, right? It begins in a garden, it ends in a city. And the way in which we are like coming to terms with our little moment in that grand story is describing, kind of the chaos we see around us, is that the state is basically saying, hey, come back stay in the womb and I'll give you your sacrifices. I'll take care of you. I'll give you your cathartic sacrifices. So people say, okay, I'm going to trust you I'm going to put my faith in you. You're going to provide my health care and you're going to provide my safety from scary boogeymen like Putin, and you're going to protect me. And then they don't achieve that, right? They don't create that catharsis. And the mother's milk of sacrifice, as Paul would suggest, doesn't satisfy. They need the meat to grow up, right? And that's where we're at culturally, is that we're in this little teenage stage, I guess, as your analogy would suggest, and we don't know how to navigate the world as a mature adult. We have to cling back to these tribal identities that the state and its cultural, entertainment, cronies are kind of trying to provide for us. Hey, you can have your Jesus and your sacrifice too. Vote for us, and we'll let you put your BLM T-shirt on, and you can have your victimism that Christianity gives you that hunger for, but we're going to redirect it back into political violence mediated for the real villains. And that's just not going to work, is it?
No, it's not. And the longer it goes on, the more polarized you become. And, there's this great book by, what the heck was that? He's a Russian author, and he wrote it back in the 1920s. I can't remember his name, but the book's called On the Resistance on Resisting Evil by Force, I think is what it's called. And this was a deeply religious Orthodox Christian man who had witnessed the just abject horror of the Bolshevik takeover of Russia, and had to grapple with the question of, what happens when, famously, I think Gandhi said that, this may be apocryphal, but either way, it's fine, that his tactics that he used on the British, his nonviolent approach, would not have worked against Genghis Khan, right? It just wouldn't have worked. And, so we see things like, the Indian Revolution with Gandhi or the Civil Rights Revolution with Martin Luther King. And those are obviously great triumphs of a Girardian approach, like a Girardian Christian approach in a way, right? Like, not using Satan to cast out Satan, and instead putting yourself, in a sense, on a cross so that you can be held up and people will look and recognize what it is that's actually being done here, the violence underlying what's being done here. On the other hand, what do you do if you're confronted with a truly implacable enemy who is not going to be affected by those considerations? That's a tough question, and whether you stand up to it forcefully or whether you allow yourself to be martyred, literally or figuratively, it's a tough question. Like if the Gospels did not include the passage about Jesus fashioning the whip and chasing away the money changers, I think it would be a lot less complicated question. Right. It would be, you just have to let yourself be martyred. Like that's what has to happen, and have faith that God will see it through, that God will turn all of this to good in his own good time and in his own planning. But then you have that passage where, Jesus sees people desecrating his Father's temple and he fashions a whip and chases them out. And, if we're meant to imitate Christ, like that's a very interesting passage that introduces another element.
Well, the question, it is a great observation. And, I am not a pacifist. I do believe we have to imitate Jesus' nonviolence, but I guess as best as I can understand it, I've come to believe that means, no aggression, no initiation of violence, and no vengeance. There's a difference between defensive force and vengeance, right? If you're defending someone breaking into your home and hurting your children, you stop them and stop them in their tracks from hurting an innocent victim. That's defensive force. But if they break into your home and you chase them out, and then the next week you go to their home and kill everybody else, that's vengeance, right? And I think the line
there's this great anecdote from the First World War. There's this British general, and he's walking around the back lines, and he passes an execution that's about to take place, and it's the execution of a I don't think he was a deserter. I think he was a man who just broke down and when he was told to go over the top, refused to go over the top. And he's about to be executed. And the British general goes up to him. He breaks off from what he's doing and he goes to talk to the man the guy's like basically getting tied up. It's going to happen right now. And he goes and, the man's terrified. And he tells the man, he kind of gets very close to him and kind of puts his arm like around the back of his neck. And he tells him that his crime that he committed was not a venal crime, and he's not a venal person, but that for the sake of the morale of the rest of the men, that in fact, like there's a nobility to like his death because, it's going to give strength and courage to men in the future who see his example of what happened, and it's actually going to save the lives. And he gives them this kind of speech, and it actually calms the guy down, but he doesn't commute the execution. The man's executed. And so I think, the answer I've come up with has been that, the answer is law. Basically, like you said, no vengeance, no mob violence, nothing like that. If they would have taken that guy, the deserter, or the man who refused orders, and brought him up and put him in stocks and let everybody throw cabbage at him and abuse him and just turned it into like a mob spectacle so that you can say, look at what happens if you do this and get everybody in on it. That's a Girardian sacrifice, right? But if there's law and you enforce the law dispassionately and even compassionately. You can have, to reach a place where, you can have some 19-year-old who grew up in the deepest, darkest, ghetto in America who never really had a chance. And he goes off the tracks. And by the time he's 19, he's addicted to drugs, robs a liquor store, kills somebody, and now he's facing the death penalty. But to be able to look at that and say, I don't hate this person. Like I have in a lot of ways compassion for this person, but this person's going to be executed because that's the law. And I think law is the defense that we have against mimetic conflict. And it's one of the reasons, right, that like you look at the breakdown of all of our political and judicial institutions in the last several years, why it's so dangerous is like you either have those institutions or you have mob activity. Those are your two options. And especially in a developed society. In undeveloped societies, you have tribalism and so forth. But like I think that law, dispassionate law, is our only real defense against that.
And that's the question that's kind of like leading to where I wanted to conclude is this conversation about, because we've talked a lot about historical where we got here, but then like everybody wants to know, so what does politics look like in this time? Like, how do you, because that's the big thing everybody's interested in mimetically. We all want to know, okay, politics, if you're not interested in politics interested in you. And we saw that on full display with the COVID insanity and the attempt to really shuffle people into this biomedical tyranny state. To me, I look at it's like a tension thing, because I see Christianity as the end of the state, insofar as the state is always going to, even if most well-intended Christian gets a hold of the apparatus and tries to bring back some kind of Christian way, it's always going to end up spilling a little sacrificial excess, that's going to be a sin, right? So how do you engage in defending yourself against the state while not being consumed by its pagan origins, right? It's a clash of cultures between the project that Christianity has in mind with the kingdom of heaven, and yet the kingdom of the world, which is run in the way that the prince of the world likes, which is Satan casting out Satan. It's a real conundrum for people, because I do believe that we shouldn't be like the Mennonites or whatever and just disengage from the political project. But the way in which we engage it is the devil in the details there, right? The devil's in the details.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the state is always going to be a dangerous instrument with a tendency toward evil, and people can call it a necessary evil. And I suppose on some level that's true. But yeah, I mean, what part of it is accepting the fact that like there are going to be times, like if you were a Russian, Ukrainian peasant in 1932, you could say, well, how do we protect ourselves from this state? And the answer was, you just don't. This thing is a monster, and sometimes that monster gets off its leash and it's gonna do some damage. I think that the key for a Christian has to be that throughout just being able to maintain your, just dignity as a human being, and not letting yourself turn into a devil as a result of being, in a world full of devils. That has to be the chief mission. Once you achieve that, like I personally, like I don't, and I could be wrong about this. I'm certainly open to being wrong about it. Like, I don't think there's a whole lot to be achieved in national politics in America anymore. But I think we're seeing in your home state of Florida, for example, and a lot of local communities, that fortunately, as degraded as our constitutional system has been over the years, it turns out that the people who designed it were pretty smart, and they put some wording in there that whether the people at the very top like it or not, has devolved a tremendous amount of power and legitimacy to more local levels of government. You think of somebody like a county sheriff. I mean, if you really get into like the constitutional powers of a county sheriff, like that's damn near a sovereign. I mean, he's like, that's an elected official with a tremendous amount of power. And as we get into a period like this, like I think we're in a very dark period right now, in a very dangerous period. And the thing to do in a time like that is to preserve your honor and your dignity, and focus on things very close to home. Focus on making sure that you and your family are the kind of people that you're going to want to be when all this is over and you're looking back on it.
Is there a way to scratch the victimism itch that is fueling the rage of the left in a political project by Christians who are, taking their faith seriously? Does that make sense? And the idea is,
yeah,
so,
it does.
Because there's this one way, which is like, okay, because there's this critique with the new right and everything saying, that old, Reagan coalition stuff, they always fight with principles. They always get their clocks cleaned by the left, and it's time to fight hard. And I'm like, no, you're going to fall into the mimetic rivalry deal that's going to just consume you. Look at January 6th. You try to imitate the mob, you become the mob. They use that for fuel to get nastier and nastier. So that's not going to work. But is there a way, to scratch the itch of victim concern that Christianity is putting in all of our hearts, and the left feels it, and they're being drawn into heretical misdirections of that energy, these kind of heretical perversions of Christianity that say, hey, that feeling of guilt and that feeling of being haunted, that's the cross that's pulling you there. Here's how we'll defend victims in a righteous and ethical way, not in the way in which it's vengeance, basically.
Yeah. That's a good question. That is a good question. How you would do that. Yeah, I don't know.
Because I think that's missing.
That's a good question.
I think that question is missing from this whole debate, right? Because you have, I guess what I'm saying is the new right rightly understands some of the mistakes of the old Reagan coalition era conservatism, but they're getting the wrong answer. Oh, we're going to go fight. We're going to cancel them back. Well, that really doesn't solve the problem we're in, right? We have to be able to, because they're haunted by the cross. In my opinion, the gospel is locking us into a stumbling block situation in which, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and it's a stumbling block for people who are running into it. So right now we have millions of people in that context, and what the right typically seems to be doing is either trying to do a cheap imitation of what the left is doing, or just doing the mimetic opposite. Okay, you're compassionate and loving and caring. I'm going to be the jerk. Nah. Both of those solutions don't work, right? We're supposed to be the ones that are the adults in the room that say, okay, listen, what's drawing you towards this wokeism stuff is really you're haunted by the cross, right? And so what's drawing you to that is there are real victims in our society. So we're going to create a political project in which we can actually protect those victims without going to the lawlessness of consecrating undifferentiation as law, which is what I see the leftist project ultimately leading to, right? So it's what I'm saying is, can we have differentiation and hierarchy in an organic way while also advocating nonviolence and concern for victims? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the question is, can we still do that, right? Like, if we've reached a level of polarization that makes it very difficult. I think that maybe one way to put the struggle that conservatives have been having over the last maybe half decade or 6-7 years or so, as things have heated up, is I think conservatives have largely been trying to find a way to de-escalate and accommodate a lot of what the left is talking about. I mean, if you remember during the George Floyd riots, Fox News was full of Republican senators and everything else going on, and basically just sounding like Democrats on the issue, trying to meet them in the middle or not even in the middle, but joining them in that, even as cities were burning. And I think the struggle that conservatives have had over the last few years, and this is in a way, I think, even maybe the split between the David French and the new right, kind of more in your face types, is if you were in 1858 and the northern press and the southern press are just laying into each other and things are getting more and more way to civil war, the right thing to do in 1858 would be to run around and tell everybody, hey, this is going nowhere. This is a bad idea. We need to de-escalate. We need to do this. Everybody calm down. But once you're on the battlefield of Gettysburg, the person who's doing that is, a tactical problem. That's, that's not the time and place for something like that. And conservatives have been trying to find a way to tell themselves that we're not at that point yet, that there's still some way to de-escalate with these people. And, we'll see how that develops. It's very hard to say. This isn't a Girardian point, but, I really enjoyed that the Strauss and Howe's book, The Fourth Turning. Have you read that? Are you familiar with it?
I'm familiar with it. I haven't read it directly. But.
Yeah, it's this theory of historical generational cycles, and he kind of talks about how you can go back every 80 to 100 years, sticking to like Anglo-American history, right? American history, and then once you hit 1776, go back to British history just to keep the continuity. And every 80 to 100 years, go back to World War II, go back to the Civil War, go back to the Revolutionary War, go back to the Glorious Revolution, go back to the Armada Crisis, go back to the Wars of the Roses, all the way back to the 1400s. Consistently, every 80 to 100 years, some crisis builds up to a point where all of the little internecine rivalries and hostilities that might exist in the society all kind of coalesce into two sides. And those sides increasingly feel like they simply cannot live alongside the other people anymore. And it gets to a point where there's just a massive explosion that on the other side of it, basically an entirely new order emerges, because one side is either victorious and everybody knows it, including the defeated party, or everything is just destroyed and somebody comes and picks up the pieces, however it works. And we're smack dab in that period right now. I mean, there's they wrote that book, I think, in 1996, and it's very interesting because they said, okay, so if the pattern holds, the pattern that goes all the way back to the War of the Roses holds, you can expect something to happen in the mid 2000s. Now, we don't know what it's going to be. It might be, this is literally what they say. They say it might be a financial crisis. It might be a terrorist act. It might be a young, charismatic president who politicizes a large group. They literally say that is going to happen around the mid 2000s. And that's going to start the ball rolling, and things are going to start building. The tension is going to start building until we get up to, say, the mid 2020s or so, where we're going to reach a real crisis period, and this thing's going to be resolved one way or another. And they said they wrote that in 1996, and it's been very prescient, obviously. And I can't say that I believe in their theory in some ontological or metaphysical sense, but at the same time, I wouldn't bet against a trend that goes all the way back to the Wars of the Roses. So
right, it just seems to me like we're in a bind where the gospel is so infected in us that we have no choice but to try to create culture and order and meaning outside the gate of the state, in my opinion. And that doesn't mean you don't engage the state, but there has to be it has to be a kind of controlled, very peaceful demolition of the state's influence in our culture, because otherwise I don't see how this is going to hold, because the state only offers us cheap imitations of the real deal of the gospel. It's just going to say, hey, because even again, assuming you get, so what are you going to do? You're going to ban the speech of communists on Twitter once you get a hold of the apparatus of the cathedral or whatever. You're going to start banning the left libs so they don't spread their insidiousness. No, you've got to understand when he says the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Anytime you're banning or expelling, you're creating martyr's energy for your opponent to come back harder, right? That's the kind of double bind that we're in, right? It's a stumbling block for a reason. The more you say, well, and I know that's tricky because I know history, and you're thinking, wait a second, what about all the subversions, communism and all these different things that have ruined millions of people's lives? If we had just banned that guy from writing that book, maybe that would have stopped the spread of communism into Russia. I mean, I'm not sure you're saying that, but I know that's a sentiment people might think. But
sure.
how do we do anything in politics is my answer. And that's, I'm not a libertarian, but I do think that Christianity leads us to an eschatological anarchism that's almost inevitable. And it doesn't mean that it's anarchism in a sense of no order. I do believe in differentiation, and boundaries and hierarchy will always be present. But the way in which we get to them, I think, is a different path than the way conservative Christians or so forth have been kind of exploring recently,
Yeah. If these questions were easy, we wouldn't have needed God to come down and get executed on a cross to teach them to us. It's a tough bind for a reason. And, especially, you go back even to really extreme circumstances, you read Christopher Browning's book, Ordinary Men. It's about this group of like rear echelon Nazi German basically police officers, and they would take these guys while the young men were out on the front, the Eastern Front fighting the war. These guys would be responsible for a lot of the rear echelon actions, right? Like reprisals against villages that had defended partisans, or if they rounded up a bunch of Jews that needed to be executed or something, they would put it on these guys. And it's a story of this unit who, it's the most fascinating thing about the book is he has like first person accounts. He's interviewed a lot of these guys, and the thing that they say over and over, like at the beginning, when they the first time they had received a batch of Jews that they were ordered to execute, their commander told them that, he gave them this big speech. Like, I understand this is extremely difficult and very like unappetizing. None of us want to do this. If there's anybody who just really does not want to be a part of this, you don't have to be a part of this. But nobody refused to be a part of it, even though these guys were extremely queasy to the point, they were breaking down, vomiting, by the end of it. And their motivation for not, for participating and not pulling back from it was they figured that if I pull back, then I'm just leaving this horrible task to my friends. And so out of duty and loyalty to my friends here and to my country, I'm obeying, I'm in the military and I'm obeying the order of a superior officer in wartime, right? That these are all very positive impulses. I mean, you don't want to leave this dirty task to your comrades. You don't want to, betray your oath that you took when you joined the military. These are like some of the best things about us, but that's what the devil does, right? The devil's great power is he turns good to evil. Demons don't have the power to pick you up by the scruff of the neck and throw you off a cliff. Demons are masters of illusion, and they use illusion, they use symbolic manipulation to take things that are good and turn them to the purposes of evil. And of course, fortunately for all of us, the power of God is to take things that are evil and turn them to the purposes of good.
Yeah, amen to that. When you see
and martyrdom is a perfect example. Sorry, but that's a perfect example, right? What's more evil than taking an innocent man, torturing him, and hanging him on a cross to die?
Right.
Just what's more evil than that? And yet, out of that, you see the flower that grows, and so that's the great power of God, and that's our, that's the thing that we have to, I think, fall back on at the end of the day, is that however bleak things look, if we keep our faith and allow ourselves to, if we maintain ourselves, that maybe it's not going to be in our lifetimes, maybe it'll be our children's lifetimes, maybe past that. The people who, the tens of millions of people who were killed in the Soviet Union, they didn't get any vindication for 70 years. And so you never know, but that's the gig. I mean, you want to be a Christian, it means that you have to be ready for sacrifice and even martyrdom.
Do you believe that Jesus will succeed in saving the world in history?
Yes. Yeah.
I do too.
Yes.
That's something, a lot of Christians have, whatever their eschatology is. Just for me, I feel like it feels like the part that we're supposed to do in history is us walking through the theme park, and then the moment when Jesus comes back, it's like we get on the ride and it's on autopilot. Oh, look, that's the conclusion. I don't think it's that way. I think it's like we're supposed to, the Bible says we're supposed to be his body on earth, and we are supposed to subdue the enemies of God, which are death, devil, and sin. And to me, I read in times Jesus is going to reign until we have made his enemies a footstool for him, and that's what the parousia, this idea of this triumphant return of Christ, is using this Roman language of the idea of a conquering hero who comes back with his enemies in the train. I've just defeated this foreign land.
And it's also the same mistake that the Jews made in expecting their Messiah to come back as this conquering force that was going to solve all these problems.
Right, but I think it's more of it's kind of a do-it-yourself way of getting to that parousia moment. Because if you look at his enemies described in the New Testament, you got the sin. Okay, that's the personal problem. You've got the Satan, which is the scapegoat mechanism, the sacrificial machine that's enthralling us, and you've got death, right, which is another part of the enemies of Jesus's mission. And I think we're supposed to defeat every one of those in our own time and just move the ball forward on that mission, such that when he returns, there are vanquished foes already on his train, not, I've got to beat them up. You see what I mean? It's a different kind of view of the end of the world that I think is what we're called to be a part of. So I really appreciate you. This has been one of the best discussions I've done on this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, great. Cool. Yeah, we could do it again sometime. Sorry I've been such a pain to get a hold of lately, but I've kind of been all over the place for the last several months.
I can imagine. It's very awesome to see. I want, that's the problem we have, and I'll just leave it here, is that we need more fire-powered public intellectuals to have a real good discussion. Instead of the talking head punditry, the cheap little platitudes, I want to see people like you, showing up on nightly cable news, or not that that's the best medium, but just being a part of the cultural discussion. That we need that, because if we don't have history as our guide and understanding even deeper than that, what I believe anthropology provides us, which your background in studying these things really gives you that ammo to be able to give us an insight that can make sense for what we see today. So really glad to have folks like you really in an ascendant stage to be able to reach more people with these deeper ideas. It's great.
Well, that's fantastic, man. That's really great to hear, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and check out MartyrMade.substack.com. That's MartyrMade.substack.com, where you can see his podcast and subscribe for all kinds of good stuff there. So I'm a subscriber. I'm a big fan. So thanks again.
I've also got another podcast with my friend Jocko Willink called Jocko Unraveling, where we kind of pick apart historical issues, and usually sometimes we just get into the history, but we always try to relate them up to the common day to kind of spend a lot of time on 20th century history lately to kind of give context to current events. And that's another one.
That's right up our alley. So check that out as well. So thanks again.
Thanks, man.